Hey, what's up everybody? This is Joshua Casper. I'm back at you with another plugin boutique tutorial. Today we're checking out REELight by Beatskillz. REELight, if you couldn't tell just by this user interface, is a tape saturation plugin that sounds really great and is actually really versatile for how simple the user interface is. So what I'm going to do is just show you this example I have, run through some of the presets, all the parameters on the user interface, and then I'm going to show you two tricks to do inside of Ableton Live or to reproduce inside of your own DAW for working with REELight. So let's go ahead and hear this example. So you see how I've really livened up that drum loop that I have there. I'm going for an old school hip hop feel, and REELight in conjunction with the trick I'm going to show you at the end of the tutorial is really doing it for me. It's making it sound perfect for what I'm going for. So real quick, the preset menu is quite immense. As you can see, we have acoustic guitar, we've got drums, we've got electric guitar, we've got drum specifics like hi-hats, kicks, and snares. We've got for the master bus, we've got pianos and synthesizers and vocals there at the end. And all of that is done with just these parameters here. It's just awesome. So let's go ahead and talk about these parameters. We've got the dry wet knob here, and you might not have noticed it because it kind of sits in here with the tape deck, which isn't, you can't touch anything in here, you can't click or move anything, but this dry wet knob does actually work, so that's something to keep in mind there. Another thing is the bypass button is the same as the on-off power switch here right on the unit itself. We got the low boost, and this is before the input drive, so you can EQ boost the low end of your track or whatever sound you're feeding into it, or you can low cut, which is going to be the opposite of that obviously. And then you have the input or drive, and this is really where the magic happens, because in old school tape unit, the drive is where the distortion or saturation, depending on what you want to call it, but that's where it happens. It's just pushing it a little bit into the red, and you get some coloration that is warm and makes things sound fuller and brighter, and that's because it's adding upper harmonic frequencies to the sound. So if you put it on like the master track and push it a little bit into the red, you're just going to get a warmer sound. However, you can go really crazy and really push it and get some really distorted, gnarly results, which can be quite pleasing if you're in the right style of music. Then there's the output, and if you notice back looking at between these two, they're kind of like reversed, right? So I've got maybe +2, +5 dB here, and I've got -2, -5, and this is actually quite common, and it's a good way to not add volume to the sound, but just add the characteristics of the distortion or saturation that you're adding to it from the input drive. I'm going to show you a quick tip inside Ableton Live on how to make sure that's always happening, but we're going to jump into that in 1 second. We have the IPS, which stands for inches per second, and we have two very common speeds here. This 15 and 7.5. The inches per second is how many inches of tape runs through the tape player at any given second. Air happens after the distortion or saturation happens from the unit, and you can just kind of boost those upper harmonic frequencies that have been added by the distortion. So if you want to add just a little bit more, it's a good option to be able to have that. The noise for the unit is pretty straightforward. It's just a white noise hiss that used to come from, a tape saturation unit that was a piece of hardware inside of a studio from the circuitry and whatnot. And it's actually quite pleasant. If I turn it up, that's one of the most pleasant white noises I've ever heard. But let's just go ahead and run through some of these presets on this drum track, and then I'm going to show you those two tips and tricks I was talking about at the beginning of the video. So here we go. And let's just go ahead right into the drums. And as you can see, it's getting really grimy, really dirty, and for something like hip hop, it's actually really perfect, right? And this drums tape saturation one is my go-to. It's my baby. It's the one that I always go to first to see what it does. And then if it's not enough or I need a little bit more drive, I can go back in and crank some other stuff. But it just sounds so good. Listen to that. so good. If we come into some of these other sounds, we can play with some of these other presets just to get an idea, a better idea of what REELight can do. So right there, it's obviously gnarly, right? There's probably not a good chance you want to run that. But I think if you just pull back on the dry wet knob right here, and that's, you know, this is the thing you want to do with the saturation unit. You only want to put a little bit on usually. And that's just going to lead me right into my tip that I want to show you how to do. So I'm going to come back into those drums for a second, solo them, and I've got an audio effects rack, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that and drop REELight back on that drum loop. That's too much noise, turn it down. And I'm actually just going to come into that drum tape saturation 1. And what I'm going to do is right here on the dry wet, I'm going to pull it all the way to wet, and again turn that noise all the way down. And that's way too much, but that's not a problem right now. I'm going to go ahead and click down here, Control G to group it into its own little effects rack. I'm going to right click here, add another chain, and I'm going to call this dry, and I'm going to call this wet. And if I come into the chain selector and just kind of distribute the ranges here, I'm going to go all the way to 126 and then ramp it up, and then move this one from 0 to 1 and go all the way to 127 and then ramp it up, and then go ahead and map the chain selector to a macro. And as you can see now I've created my own dry wet knob here. So when this is all the way to the left, it's 100% wet because it's only getting the chain signal from the REELight. And when it's all the way at 127, we're not getting any signal from the REELight. So if I go ahead and play that, and you might be saying, Josh, what's the point? You can just use the wet dry right here inside of REELight. And you absolutely can if you don't want to add anything else. And one thing that I found really, really nice, especially with dealing with like hip hop, chill out music, ambient stuff, is adding a small room reverb after the saturator. So let's go ahead and jump into just the stock reverb plug here. And come into room and just choose ambience or something like that. And I'm just going to pull back the dry wet a little bit. And now let's go ahead and listen. So you see, as I'm A-Bing that reverb, it's actually really widening it up. And that's because it's not a long reverb and we're only adding a little bit. So it's really making it sound roomy. And in conjunction with this dry wet knob, we can get some really interesting results without having to worry about any of the parameters inside of the saturator or inside of the reverb. And obviously we can go a little bit crazier, put some more effects in there, and do some other cool things. Okay, so that was the first trick I wanted to show you. The second one is about the input and output levels. You remember in the beginning of the video I said it's quite common to, as you increase the input, to decrease the output, and that way the level stays pretty close to the same, except for the addition of the saturation harmonics in the upper frequencies. There's an easy way to get that to happen all the time, and that is with another effects rack. So if I go ahead, Control G to add another group, and what I can do is right here extend to see the parameters, and because there's only a few, we got them already lined up right here. If I come to input drive, right click, map to macro 1, and output, right click, map to macro 1, go into map mode, and on either the input or the output, just right click and say invert range. Watch what happens now when I move this macro to the input and output drives. they're moving in opposite directions. So now I've got that sort of relative input-output relationship without having to go move one and move the other. And now we can get a better understanding of what the drive is doing to the sound of, you know, whatever we're affecting with the saturator. So let's go ahead and listen. So that sounds so good. And it's just really cool to have that functionality inside of Ableton Live while using REELight, because I really like the distortion characteristics REELight applies to any sound being fed into it. And that's going to do it for this video. I highly suggest checking out REELight. It's available on Plugin Boutique right now. The link's in the description of the video. I hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.